Hello, welcome back. We're going to do part 2, which is the slipped constrictor knot. We're going to use this to as a binding knot to pinch off the end of the rope while we apply the whipping. And 2 constrictor knots side by side with a space little space in between is an excellent way to cut through the rope to get rid of the excess on the end. So we're going to be tying 2 constrictor knots that way in this whipping that I'm going to show you how to do in the next video. Just a little bit of background, the constrictor knot is probably my favorite knot of all time. I use it more than just about anything else. There aren't a whole lot of climbing applications for it. It's what they call a binding knot, so it's for tying something off around a cylinder or a rope. Clifford Ashley, who wrote the Ashley Book of Knots, invented this knot. And it is used in all kinds of different applications these days. I'm going to show you 4 different ways to tie it in this video, and then we'll go from there. So the first way that I learned how to tie this knot was on the end of a rope. So this is how you tie it this way. So I came up with a rhyme to remember how to tie this, just as a mnemonic device, and it worked well because I remember how to tie it, and I still say it in my head even though I know how to tie it now. So this is my little rhyme for tying a constrictor on the end. Lead to the left, on a diagonal to the left, X to the right, up through the middle, around the strand on the left, around, and tight. That's a constrictor knot. So the advantage of a constrictor knot is, and there's no other knot that I know of that gathers tension and holds it the way a constrictor knot does. Everybody knows the feeling of trying to keep tension in a knot, like tying your shoes or tying the string on your the waistband of your gym shorts or something, of trying to hold the tension in while you make the last hitch to tighten it down, and you always invariably feel it slip just a little bit before you get the final clinch down. The constrictor doesn't do that at all. Every bit of tension that you put into a constrictor knot, it holds it forever. It is unbelievable the way it works that way. Every bit of tension you put in it, it holds every bit of it, and it doesn't slip back on itself. Every knot has an advantage and every knot has a disadvantage. There are no universal knots. So the advantage of the constrictor knot is what I just described there, the way it holds tension. The disadvantages of it is it's really difficult to untie. In some instances, almost impossible. You'd have to cut it off. But we're going to get around that because I'm going to show you a way to tie it with a slip introduced, which gives us a quick release to untie it. If you are practicing this knot on a wooden dowel, my favorite way to untie it, you can definitely untie it with this thick a cord, and on a mandrel like this, it's not that big a deal. But the easiest way is to just spread the legs apart on the back of the cylinder and then pick it apart like that. Or you can just slide the whole thing off the end and it'll fall apart. So just one more time, the way to tie it this way: lead to the left, X to the right, up through the middle, and then around that strand on the left, around, and tight. Lead to the left, X to the right, up through the middle, around, and tight. Okay, I'm going to show you a variation on that same tying method, and this is called a doubled constrictor knot. It just introduces an extra wrap in there and more friction in the system, so we need a little bit more rope for this one. So it's the same procedure except for one extra step. So it's lead to the left, X to the right, X to the right again, up through the middle, under both those strands, around, and tight. So the extra wrap just puts a little bit more friction in that binding knot, and man, does that ever hold. A double constrictor knot is just like a force of nature. It's amazing. It holds so tight. So there's the doubled constrictor. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to tie a constrictor knot in the bight. And this is my favorite way to tie the constrictor knot. It's faster than the method that I just showed you, and it's my favorite way to tie it. Even if I'm going to tie a constrictor knot near the end, the working end of a rope, I'll still tie it in the bight just because it's faster. So this is how you tie it in the bight. You hold it like this, about 10 inches apart. The left hand is just going to pinch it and it's not going to move. And the right hand, the first move is we're going to twist towards me to make a loop, pinch it, twist away from me to make another loop. So you have this figure 8 happening here with one line on the other side of the standing end and one line on my side. The next step is to take this side and bring it up and over to the middle again. So now you have this figure 8 configuration, and you have a line coming out this way and a line coming out this way. And the last step is you just think of these as butterfly wings and just drop them down, close those wings, and that's the hole through which you put your object or rope. It makes the exact same knot as tying it the other way. It's just a different way of forming it, and I think a lot faster. I'll show you one more time. Twist towards me to make a loop and pinch it. Twist away from me to make another loop. And now bring this line up and over and behind, back to the vertice in the middle. And now you have a line coming out this side, a line coming out the other side, which I tend to hold with my pinky. And just fold those wings down. And now put it over your object or rope. And when you dress a constrictor knot, push these strands, these legs in the back, push them up against each other. It's not just an aesthetic thing. Yes, it looks nicer, and that's why I do it, but it also adds to the effectiveness of the binding because it's more friction having those lines up against each other, and it will tighten and stay tightened even better. Okay. Now, you know 2 different ways to tie the constrictor. I'm going to introduce one more element, which is that slip, that quick release that we need so that we can untie it again. So I'm going to tie it in the bight like I just showed you, and then I'm going to add one extra step for the slip. So twist towards me to make a loop, twist away from me, behind, and at this point where we would normally fold the wings down, I'm going to take this working end and put it through on the back side away from me through to the other side. So now I have a bight instead of a single strand on this side. Now I fold these wings down and you'll see that I have a bight on this side and 2 strands on this side. Now put it around your object. Now this is where it's a little tricky, but once you get the hang of it, it won't be too bad. One side of this bight is the slip. It just slides back and forth, so we can't tighten the knot with the slip. We have to tighten it with the other side. It's kind of like your climbing line and your release line. So this is your release line. It's going to do nothing. It's part of the slip. We want to grab this side to tighten the knot. Okay, dress it up. You know, if you're confused about the configuration, just give a tug on one side and see if it tightens or if it just slips. If it just slips, that's the wrong side. Grab the other side and tighten that climbing line, you might say. And now, instead of one strand out the other side, we have a slip. And we can pull on the release line, shorten up that loop just to get it out of our way. I recommend when we're doing the whipping, don't pull it too tight. Leave enough of a loop that you can get your finger through or your marlin spike through, and then just leave it. And when we do the whipping, we're going to do 2 constrictor knots side by side, but with a little space in between. And then we're going to do our whipping up to this first constrictor knot. So because we're doing the whipping, we're going to be doing the whipping right here, just tie whatever excess string you got in a half hitch loosely around this side, just to keep it out of our way, because we're going to be working over here. And if there's a bunch of excess twine, it's good to have that excess in the end, because you want enough of a working end on the other side to tie a marlin spike hitch so you can reef it back out. But what that does in the end, when we're done making our whipping and we don't need the constrictor anymore, we've cut through the space in between the two constrictors, and now we have our whipping. We don't need this anymore, is now we have a quick release, and I can tie a marlin spike hitch, which I showed you in the first video. And this is a quick release on this knot, but if we tie it real tight, it's going to take some convincing to pull it out, but it will slip. And we're going to, whoops, I'm pulling the climbing line. If you feel it tightening, you're on the wrong line. This is the slip. And now when I pull on it, it'll pull apart the constrictor knot. The slipped constrictor knot, I'll do it one more time for you. The slipped constrictor knot is a little bit weaker than the normal constrictor knot. It's a little bit less, you might notice a little bit of slip as you're setting it up compared to the original one, which has zero slip to it at all. But it definitely works good enough for us to use it in this application. If I wanted absolute strength and security for whatever I was using a constrictor for, I would just use the plain constrictor. But for our purposes today, the slip constrictor is just fine. And it does hold once you get it set up. It's just a little bit more awkward to set it up. I pulled on the wrong side there. It can be confusing, but if you pull on one side and the loop gets smaller, you're on the slip line. If you pull it on the other one, it'll get tighter. It's a really handy version of the constrictor if you want the properties of the constrictor knot, but you don't want to have to fight or cut it off at the end. Then you can pull it and it just comes apart. One quick... I like my fun little facts, so I'll throw in one fun fact about the constrictor knot. The constrictor knot is used in surgery to tie off an artery. You can tie it by setting your forceps across the artery. The wooden dowel would be an artery in this case, and you tie it by making an X around your forceps, and instead of the around and tight part, you just clip the end of the line with your forceps, and you pull it through, and that creates that last turn. And they even tie slipped constrictor knots so that if they're in a scenario where they need it to come back off, they can pull the slip on it. They used to use the most standard knot that surgeons use to tie off an artery or a vein used to be a ligature, and then they started catching on to constrictor knots, I think in like the 50s and 60s, and then eventually they did a study where they compared the two, and they found that the constrictor knot was superior to a ligature. It had less tendency to slip, to come back off, for the working end to slip through the system, and it's, from what I understand, it's a very standard knot now in surgery. So there you go. I'll see you in part 3, where we actually use the marlin spike hitch from the first video, the constrictor knot from the second video, and we do the actual whipping.